And we'll start in just a couple of minutes here. Bonjour, assalamu alaikum, peace be with you, welcome. Thank you everyone for joining us this evening for our conversation, Indigenous and Muslim Perspectives, the interaction between legal frameworks in Canada. This is our fifth in the series, and I want to welcome all of you on behalf of the Center for Religion and its Contexts here at Emmanuel College. I am the center's events and media coordinator, and I'm thrilled to have everybody join us tonight. The Center for Religion and its Contexts, through academic and continuing education events such as this, shares its distinctive contextual approach to the study of religion in all aspects: theology and belief, historical development, lived experience, and diversity of expressions in the United Church of Canada and in other Christian contexts, as well as in Muslim, Jewish, Buddhist, and other religious understanding. And for up and coming events, you can check out our link. I'm sharing that in the chat here. And there you are. Now I'd like to introduce Jonathan Hamilton Diabo, our assistant professor in the teaching stream in theology, and also the June Callwood professor in social justice. Jonathan is also, this is at Emmanuel College, and he's also Victoria University's special advisor on Indigenous issues. I'd like to welcome Jonathan to do the land acknowledgement.
Great, thank you very much, Sean. Segos Kanagoa. I'm so happy to be here and to be part of this event, and also very eager to be listening to our speakers this evening. Before we do begin, I want you to think about grounding yourself of where you are in terms of location and to understand the territory that you're in. I'm in the spaces of Toronto, where Emmanuel is, but I do want to recognize that people are joining us from all different places. So when we think about our space, we think about where we are. I look at this relationship to our land, and today's relationship is covered with snow, and we have come to appreciate what's around us. When we actually think about what a land acknowledgement, for many people there might be different ways, different terms. In the Haudenosaunee culture, we also think about a Thanksgiving address, which is about gratitude and understanding. And I think this is where I was based when we think about a land acknowledgement, is that relationship that I have, that we all have with the land, the territory, because it holds stories. It holds the stories of all living beings that have traveled through the territories that you're in the space of what I would call Toronto, or Degaronto. We have to understand that this space has been used and lived on and engaged with, and not just not just us, but it's all living beings. We think of the trees, the plants, we think of the animals, we think of the insects, we think of all life, and we're part of that. And that because of this relationship, we are able to thrive. We are able to live on this territory. And the stories of so many people in the past, we think about the Seneca people, we think about the Huron, we think about the Mississaugas, their stories, their ways, they use this land to live, but to engage with each other, with people, but they also live to engage with everything else of what is provided for us, because without it, we don't survive. And so to understand that when we are on the land, why it's so important for so many Indigenous peoples and communities is that without it, we don't survive. We won't survive. And we damage it. We have to understand we have a relationship in the sense that we have a responsibility as well. In many cases around this area, we talk about a tree or an agreement of the dish with one spoon, which between Haudenosaunee people and Anishinaabe people, it's this coming together to understand how we need to care and share for the territory. But we have to think about it in the way of what's provided is not infinite. And if we think about it that way, we exploit, we use, we damage. If we think about it solely for us, we have to understand that it is a reciprocal relationship that we have, and that we share this territory among each other, but also we share it with all living beings. And if we do something that damages that, we're not the only ones impacted too. It's all life around us. And so we have to kind of always keep that in mind when we talk about land and the importance of it, but to realize the stories of the peoples that have come through here and continue to use the space today. And it is always important to be in place and to think about our relationships today with each other, but that we strive to continue to build the relationships among each other, but also our relationships to all life around us. So when you take that moment, when we think about the territory, we think about the space we are, just take that moment just to acknowledge and to understand that we are part of creation and that we need to be grounded in that. And once we're grounded in that, we can continue to build all relationships, not just among ourselves, as we all, in different places, we live here, we work here, we thrive here, but all relationships of all life. So, Nyawagowa, and I'm so looking forward to this evening. Thank you so much.
Sorry, I was on mute. I'll say that again. My apologies. Thank you, Jonathan. And I would like to introduce, I'm just doing the tech here as well, introduce to you the Reverend Dr. Hayran Kim Craig, who is the principal of Emmanuel College and is also the Timothy Eaton Memorial Church Professor of Preaching.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you, Jonathan. It's my honor and privilege to welcome you all for this really a long-standing event. I understand that it's been the 5th time and since 19 that this very coming together between Indigenous and Muslim leaders and people of faith addressing some very important issues. And today, certainly the topic seems to be so interesting, and very much looking forward to learning from our speakers and our panelists and from all of you. Emmanuel College is and striving to be a leading theological school where Christian and Muslim and Buddhist and other religious community coming together and seeking academic inquiry and making relevant public voices and serving diverse communities of faith in this world. As I was looking at the topics that these two Indigenous and Muslim perspectives, and today is a legal framework, and last year I believe it was peace, and before that was a decolonization, and those topics are very much part of what our school actually does weekly through our class and our spiritual gatherings and so on. Some of the values that we are trying to cultivate, inclusive and respectful dialogue. And I think this group has been showcasing those, modeling those. I'm very grateful for, and not doing, silo, but with the partnerships coming together. So with the Oliver Tree Foundation in partnership with our center, and then bringing so many amazing speakers who can offer such wisdom and kind of digging deeply the issues that matter to us. So I am very grateful for this platform of learning together, and all the folks who helped so much. Definitely our moderator today and our speakers and our center coordinator, as well as our faculty, Nevin Reda, and our center director, Henry Shu. I mean, there are so many helping hands to make such great event like this possible. So deep gratitude, and looking forward to learning today. Thank you.
Thank you, Hiran. I would like to now introduce to you our MC, our Masters of Ceremony and facilitator for this evening's conversation, Fatima Ahmed. Fatima is currently in her second year of law school. Prior to law school, Fatima completed degrees in peace studies, education, disaster management, educational leadership, and computer science. That is that's extraordinary, actually. She has also explored careers in local and international community development, education, and capacity development. She has worked in many roles, including as the executive director for the Inuvik Youth Center in Inuvik, Northwest Territories, as an organizational development advisor at the Botswana Network of AIDS Service Organizations, in Nganzi, Botswana, and a women's development officer and an IT training officer for the Shefa Provincial Council in Vanuatu, South Pacific, and as a teacher at the South Jewitt School in Kangirsuk. I used to know Inuktitut, believe it or not, in Quebec. Fatima Ahmed is also a fellow with Association for Applied and Therapeutic Humors, Jill Knox Humor for Peace Fellowship Program, and with Level Justice's Social Justice Fellowship Program, and with U of Mosaic's Fellowship Program. Without further ado, I will hand things over to you, Fatima.
Thank you, Sean. To kick off our proceedings for today, I would welcome Muhammad Hasib Ali from the Olive Tree Foundation. He is the treasurer of the Olive Tree Foundation, to share a few words with us, please.
Okay, thank you, Fatima. I thought after that introduction that was read out for you, we might not have time left for the remaining of the program, but that is such a wonderful bio and the amount of not only studies but actual work being done. It's quite interesting. Anyhow, good evening, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. May peace and blessings be on you all. I want to thank everyone for being here today. I'm especially glad that this program is being done online rather than in person today, given the weather. I just I just finished shoveling the driveway, so if I sound out of breath, you'll know why. I know a land acknowledgement was done, but we'd like to also reiterate and acknowledge that we walk upon the traditional territories of the Indigenous peoples, and we recognize their history, spirituality, culture, and stewardship of the land. We are grateful to all Indigenous groups for their commitment to protect the land and its resources, and we are committed to reconciliation, partnership, and enhanced understanding. So the Olive Tree Foundation is pleased to co-sponsor this program on Indigenous and Muslim perspectives on the interaction between legal frameworks in Canada. And I think it's a very interesting topic. I thank Emmanuel College and its Center for Religion and Context for organizing this event. I know there were quite a few individuals who were key to making this event happen. Over the past 4 years, we've been pleased to co-sponsor this series of symposiums with Emmanuel College, with the hope that it will lead to greater understanding and it will also benefit the community. So just a bit about us. The Olive Tree Foundation is a socially conscious, registered public foundation known as a Waqf in Islamic terminology. So we promote community development through grant making to address needs and priorities in society. As a foundation, we look at many generations and beyond as we encourage. So we look to the future to encourage donors to create endowments. So these would be either personal endowments or a collective endowment. And what an endowment is, for those who are not so familiar. So they would donate a sum of monies. Those monies we would keep as capital, and the earnings from those monies we would utilize to fund projects. So we look at funding projects that would benefit society as a whole. So as Muslims, we believe in this enduring legacy because this endowment continues onwards, the capital continues onwards. It's the earnings that are used to fund projects and so forth. So it's an enduring legacy that will benefit us in this world and in the afterlife as well. So one of the areas of focus of our grants has been Indigenous projects. We've also had several other areas that we have funded as well, several key areas that we've funded, such as social and health services, education services, policy initiatives and think tanks, and arts, culture, and heritage programs. So Indigenous projects are one of the big ones we've looked at recently. And a few examples of the projects we have funded. Last year, we provided a grant to Ontario Nature for a project called Youth Circle for Mother Earth. That project aimed to create and support a cross-cultural network of young Indigenous and non-Indigenous environmental leaders looking to honor their responsibilities and relationship with Mother Earth. So that was one. We're also funding 2 Spirit Bear Awards, which is an annual award of the First Nations Children and Family Caring Society of Canada. And that goes to a group of young people, individuals, who demonstrate their commitment to reconciliation and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action. So that's a brief overview of the Olive Tree Foundation. If you're looking for any further details, you can visit our website, olivetreefoundation.ca. Lots of information on many other projects we have funded. And if anyone's interested in setting up some sort of endowment, we'd be more than happy to speak with you. And that's about it. I'm looking forward to this upcoming discussion. As I mentioned, it's a very interesting topic. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Jazakallah khairan. Thank you, Mohammed Hasib Ali. Thank you for those comments and for your support for this series of events. Moving forward, I would like to invite our first speaker, and I will provide a short bio. So Dr. Ingrid Mattson was born and raised in Canada, earning a BA honors in philosophy and fine arts, then moved to the United States to study at the University of Chicago, earning a PhD in Near Eastern Language and Civilizations in 1999. From 1998 to 2012, she was the professor of Islamic Studies at Hartford Seminary in Connecticut, where she developed and directed the first accredited graduate program for Muslim chaplains in North America, and served as a director of the McDonald Center for the Study of Islam and Christian-Muslim Relations. Since 2012, she has held the London and Windsor Community Chair in Islamic Studies at Turing University College at Western University in London, Canada. From 2001 to 2010, Dr. Mattson served as a vice president, then as a president of the Indiana-based Islamic Society of North America. In that position, she established the Office of Interfaith and Community Engagement in Washington, D.C., and facilitated new partnerships with other faith-based communities and civic organizations. Her writings, both academic and public, focus primarily on Quran interpretation, Islamic theological ethics, and interfaith relations. Her book, The Story of the Quran, is an academic bestseller and was distributed to libraries across the United States by the U.S. National Endowment for the Humanities. Dr. Mattson is a senior fellow of the Royal Ahlul Bayt Institute for Islamic Thought in Amman, Jordan, and was a member of the Interfaith Task Force of the White House Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships during the presidency of Barack Obama. She is the recipient of numerous awards as well as honorary doctorates for Trinity College, Hartford, the Chicago Theological Seminary, and the University of Waterloo. Some of her work can be found on her website, ingridmattson.org. Thank you.
Great, I'll open that up. Thank you very much, Fatima. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, the most merciful, the compassionate. I'm so grateful to be joining you here tonight. I am coming to you from London, Ontario, which is located on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabeg, the Haudenosaunee, the Nunapawak, and the Arawandran people, and our relationship is governed by the Dish with One Spoon Covenant, Wampum. As a Canadian, I have ethical obligation to uphold the recommendations and to forward and promote the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And I am also obliged to do that by our holy book, the words of God in the Quran, who says, "Those who respect their trusts and covenants, and those who stand firm in their testimonies, and those who guard their worship, such will be the honored ones in the gardens of the afterlife." So one of the really strong themes in the Quran is the obligation to fulfill trusts and covenants, that when one takes an oath or when one makes a contract, it is obligatory to uphold those. And so part of our legal obligation, our Islamic legal obligation in this land, is to fulfill all of the contracts and covenants and agreements that our government made. We can't benefit from those. We can't enjoy the benefits of Canadian citizenship without taking responsibility for what this government has done, the harms that this government has done, our government has done, our country, and also we are the upholders of those obligations. So this is one of the things that's always very interesting, I find, in speaking to Muslims, Muslim community members, teaching Islamic ethics in my classes, teaching Islamic law in my classes, is trying to support Muslims in Canada as we all try to understand these different legal identities that we occupy and social and political identities. So many Muslims, not me, my family has been here for a short time compared to the original people of this land, but long time compared to other Canadians. So my family settled here before there was a Canada, about 200 years ago. But the majority of the Canadian Muslim community actually has come here from lands that were also settled by the British or by the French or some other European colonial powers. So somehow occupying this dual identity of both being a people who were colonized in their original homelands and then also being part of a settler colonial project here is really complicated, and it's but that's life. We have to deal with this complexity, and we have to constantly try to examine our own hearts and our behavior and our priorities to understand if we're giving as much attention to our obligations as we are to our advocacy for our own rights and promoting and creating our own space to follow the sacred path. And the sacred path is how I translate the word Sharia. It is literally means the path to the water. So for example, here I live just a few blocks from the Thames River. So I always, at least once a week, I go down there. And to get to the shore of the riverbank, I follow a path that the animals, mostly deer, but also beaver, have made down through the woods and then down the bank right to the shore of the river. And so that path is literally what Sharia means. So Sharia is the well-known path that brings you to the water. And water, of course, is the source of life. We can't live without water. So the name for the norms that we are supposed to follow, that we should seek, Sharia, it does not mean law. It is much more than that. It's what is good, it's what's wholesome, and what is divinely, the divinely ordained direction. But it has so much to do with also this path is trod by the people that we live with. You know, all of these beings that we live with, human and animals. So it has to be that path that's life-giving for all of us. And this is really our challenge, I guess the challenge for all of us in a world that is very atomized and that tends to treat, really prioritize individuals in the law. And of course, there's good reasons for that in modern law, having so much to do with individual rights and entitlements, but it can undermine or be in conflict sometimes with our desire to fulfill what we see as the best way of living according to these sacred norms, because the only way to live is to understand that we are always in community. We're in community with other people and with other living beings. And so this atomistic approach to rights and to law can really cause a lot of problems for us, especially because if we want to advocate for ourselves in law to seek an accommodation, then very often we have to articulate it in the same kind of framework that will allow us to meet our objective, meet our objective of being successful, say, in court or in front of the Human Rights Commission, or say in a university environment, employment environment, seeking accommodation. But it's always a fine balance, because we very often in doing that advocacy end up losing a lot of what we are. And what we are people who are not only individuals, but are in this network of relationships. And we have so many obligations to those who are in our community, who are in our family, and family is much bigger than just the small nuclear family. For the short time we have today, I'm going to talk about one particular issue where there's an overlap between Canadian law and Sharia, the sacred path that is quite thorny and is quite difficult, but needs to be resolved and should be resolved. And that has to do with the issue of so-called adoption. Now, the idea of who is family and what is family, as we've seen, has changed over time, has changed over the last few decades in Canada, and certain forms of family have been accepted as legitimate. Same-sex marriage, for example, marriage equality is a big shift that is dramatically different than what was before. So we see that Canadian law can adapt to different forms of family, but for the Muslim community, we find a lot of barriers to our understanding of what our obligations are as family and responsibilities towards each other and how we take care of each other. So on the one hand, the limitation of the nuclear family can be problematic for us because in Islamic law, we have legal obligations to support not just our children and our spouses, but also parents. And it could also be other members of our family who are in need. And this is, in fact, an entitlement that someone could seek in court in a jurisdiction that recognizes Sharia law. So, someone can't simply abandon a parent or say a sibling who's living with a disability or someone else in the family, the extended family that's in need in a Sharia-based jurisdiction. But here the obligations are very limited. And it leaves a lot of people in a situation of crisis. It leads people who have an expectation, especially because if they come to Canada and they've fulfilled their own obligations through the extended family, and they imagine that people are going to continue to fulfill their obligation, even if it's not required in law in Canada, at least it is in the sacred law of Islam, to have their family turn away from that obligation is very painful. And it really leads to a lot of unfairness in many ways. But if I move to the one issue that I want to focus on today, which is the issue of adoption. So many people understand or hear the term that adoption is forbidden in Islam. And of course, it depends what you mean by adoption. So in Canada, for many generations, we know that when children were adopted by law into family, they were deprived of knowledge of their family of origin. They were often deprived of knowledge of even their lineage, so they wouldn't even be told. They were lied to. And actually, there were legal obstacles created to prevent them from even knowing where they came from. And of course, no one knows this better in Canada, I think, than our Indigenous brothers and sisters who have, for many decades had this very painful experience of their children being taken away from them. And then those children who were lied to and weren't even told about where they came from. So this has changed over time because of the advocacy of those children and their families, arguing for a right for them to know who they are and where they came from. So that has shifted over time. In the sacred law of Islam, it has always been a right for any individual to know their lineage and to not be stripped of their lineage. Before Islam, children could be taken in, say, warfare or captivity, and then they would be adopted into the tribe and given a new tribal identity. So this is the law that came to turn over that, to say that you can't simply replace a child's identity with another one. It is their right to know and claim their identity. But at the same time, you have an obligation, the whole community has an obligation to take care of children. This is what's called a fard kifaya, or a collective obligation. We all are obliged to care for children, and that care is provided through this relationship of what's called kafala, which is often translated into English as fostering, which is why I think there can be a bit of a problem in the Canadian context, because it isn't a foster family like in Canadian social services. Fostering in this sense is actually bringing the child in your home, treating them as if they were your own child, caring for them, providing them with shelter and support, and raising them, but without ever denying them knowledge of their origin or their ability to continue to be in contact if there are family members that they want to be in contact with. So it's a way of providing the support, but also not cutting these children off. And when it comes to a person and their extended families, to say grandchildren or nephews or nieces or even cousins, it could even get to the level of an obligation within the family to take those children into their household and treat them as if they were their own children. Unfortunately, what we find now is that Canadian law is this form of Islamic so-called adoption used to be permitted. It was changed and blocked under, I believe it was the Harper government. And they said that it's not permitted because, Muslims could not adopt or bring in children from Muslim nations, because in those nations, it was not permitted to sever the ties between child and parent, as if that is somehow, everyone knows that's something of a good thing. It's the idea that simply severing the ties between child and parent is some kind of good thing is quite astounding to me. But we currently have, recently in the news, there's a case of a woman who's trying to bring her nieces and nephew into Canada from Pakistan. She took over their care when their mother died, and the father's not able to take care of them. So she has been their caregiver, but up until now, immigration policy in Canada will not allow her to bring them in, because they say it's only allowed to bring in children if they're your own children or adopted children. So your own children means your birth children or adopted children. So even the denial that a nephew and niece, is like the kind of family that you would have obligation for, is put to one side. But also the specific form of Islamic caregiving for children who are in need of a home is also denied. So this is something that's gone to court and people are advocating for, but it's quite, and I'll end with this because I know my time is up. A lot of the problem that we have here is that there are so many levels of, and obviously we have this bureaucratic infrastructure, and we have social service, and we have legislation, and all of it is intended to keep things in good order and to organize things and to make sure everything's done properly. But it can also lead to just barrier after barrier after barrier to justice and equity. And so I hope that, especially in this kind of thing, perhaps even the Canadian legal system or culture can learn something about how other communities understand obligations to children within the broader family and also the broader community. Thank you.
And thank you, Dr. Mattson. That was a very fitting topic, especially that Bill C-92 has been passed recently. And so in the follow-up question and answer session, maybe we can ask a few questions around that, about your thoughts around that. I am very happy to welcome the second speaker for tonight, Minawaanigogiizhigok, a.k.a.Dawnis Kennedy, Her areas of research are as follows: Anishinaabe ways of doing, ways of law, and ways of thought, culture-based education, international treaty making, impact of the Canadian Indian Act, intergenerational change and responsibility, missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, two-spirit and gender diverse advocacy, Indigenous feminism, oratory, language learning, parenting, and surviving colonization daily. Minawaanigogiizhigok is a second-degree Medevan way of heart person and was raised as a warrior woman or a woman of a big heart by the Ogiijhigok Society and elders of her community in Rosa River Anishinaabe First Nation. She is of both European and Ojibwe Anishinaabe lineage and is dedicated to reclaiming both traditions in her life and in her work. Minawaanigogiizhigok is dedicated to the pursuit of good life. She seeks and creates opportunities to live life from her heart. She builds on the good choices that her family, mentors, and friends made in their lives. Their choices to work hard, raise their families, put down alcohol, help their relatives, support the people, and reconnect to Medevan, living the ways of life, languages, and traditions that our ancestors sent forward to us. She has been called upon to articulate practices of Anishinaabe education, offer testimony as a legal expert regarding Anishinaabe legal traditions and family law, and support youth seeking connection in community. In the footsteps of all her ancestors, Minawaanigogiizhigok continues to learn and to grow, taking joy in this good life and supporting others seeking to do the same. Welcome.
Ingrid, and thank you so much for working on the language to be able to sound my name and to sound who I am. So Miigwech. I'll still also introduce myself because that is our way to sound so that our ancestors, my ancestors, can hear me. Bonjour, Nindinaway Maganetok, Minawaanigogiizhigok Nindishnakas, Wabjeshi and Dodem, Bguanish Guzi Bing and Donji, Nishing Iagua and Dijimide, Gagageo Jabanishna Be Quayendao, Nimi Guachuan Dan, the Goshnano Ma Zooming. I'm very happy to be here today on Zoom and to speak with you a little bit. I'm from, it's called Ragweed River, and I'm at home. I'm zooming in from home, but also thinking about all those spaces and those places that I traveled when I lived in Toronto as a student, as a law student, and what brings me here today. So I think for me, seeking to know our law, I truly started, I offered tobacco one time, and I remember I had just started my SJD. I was all fresh and new, and I wanted to study Anishinaabe law. So I went down to Robarts Library because there was like a lot of collection there that had like historical collection and rare books. And I looked up everything on Native law. I looked up everything on Indian law. I looked up everything on Aboriginal law. I looked up everything on even barbaric law. I looked up everything, and I had these big piles of books, and I was searching, excited to have all this time to really focus on what I had wanted to learn all this time, which was our law. I had done all the hoops that I needed to go from proving myself within Western Academy that I could do the work if I wanted to, that the choice that I was making to turn away from those well-worn paths in the libraries was a choice, an informed choice, and not a disability. or not a failure or not a lacking in any way. And when I started searching with all this time that I could find anything I wanted to, because I was in charge of my own education. I was in charge of my own dissertation. And I was reading all these books, and what they were describing was nothing like what I had heard in the lodge, nothing like what I had heard from the elders, nothing like the stories that I had been trained into. And it was like somebody was watching a silent movie and not knowing the context and narrating what was occurring from the outside. And it didn't sound like us. It didn't resonate like us. And it didn't help me to know who I was as an Anishinaabe Kwe. And so what I ended up doing, actually, I felt sick. I felt physically sick to my stomach. And what I did is I put tobacco in my hand and I went outside and I did the very thing that my grandmother taught me. When you ask for something, we don't ask for something with empty hands. That's what we're told. We always make an offering. And the tobacco plant is one of those plants that stood up for us to help us to do that work, to lead our thoughts forward through creation. And so I took that tobacco. Unfortunately, I took it out of a cigarette at that time because I was smoking. No longer am smoking, but I was at the time. And I took that tobacco in my hand and I went out to a tree. And she said, you know what? Because when we gather together in ceremony, my grandpa, then my late grandpa, and then after my late grandpa, my uncle, my late uncle, and then after my late uncle, now my little cousin leads us in ceremony when we all gather to speak to creation, to give thanks, and to tell our stories about who we are and how we're related in this earth. And so when we do that, we have a pipe, and that pipe represents the male and the female sides of creation, and make sure that our prayers go straight to the spirit. And I didn't have that at the time, but my koko said, you can always go to the foot of a tree. And there's that tree, just like the wood in the pipe. And there's the earth and the rocks, just like the bowl of that pipe. And you can offer your tobacco there, and they will straighten out anything that maybe I'm asking for something, maybe what I want, but not necessarily what I need. Or I'm not thinking far enough because I'm only thinking about me. And I'll have the help of creation to help straighten out my prayer and to make it travel. And so I did that, and I offered tobacco, and I said, I really want to know our law. I don't even know if it's there anymore. That's the way I thought, because our law is, and our people have been destabilized and are continuing to be destabilized. Our governance structures, our clan systems, our legal orders, our kinship ties, and each and every one of our relations are experiencing this ongoing colonization. So I said, I don't even know if it's there to be found, but I want to find it because that's what I want to know. I want to know our law. I don't want to know about somebody else's view who doesn't even practice it and what they think about it, looking in from the outside. I don't want to hear from Kant and Locke, who never even met one of our ancestors, telling me what the law is going to be like. That makes me feel sick, because it's like the ultimate of my disconnection going and looking for what it is. The authority on the law that I want to hear in Canadian law are people who never practiced it. They have the weight of the law behind their interpretation of a law that they have never learned. So that's what I did. I offered tobacco. And that took me away from law school. It took me out fasting, and I didn't go because that was my first thought. It was my last thought. I couldn't sleep, and I couldn't remember my dreams, and I knew there was something coming to me in my dreams. And I had to go home to my grandparents, and they told me my auntie was going out fasting. They said, "This is what you should do. You should go out fasting, find out what's going on." And so I did. And it called me home to my grandmother. My grandmother was getting ready to cross over to the spirit, and the spirit told me to go home. And you know what? Because she's my grandmother, I went. I love her so much. She was also my mother, because my mother passed when I was young at 17. So she became my mother as well. She was that close, and I became her daughter, granddaughter. You know, that's how close we were. And I wanted to be there with her. And I didn't want anybody else to be there, like on my behalf, like to hire somebody else to go in my place. The spirit was saying I needed to go. And I went home. And as a student, I called and I was like, well, I need a leave of absence, compassionate leave. And they said, you know what? She doesn't qualify. She's not your immediate family member, your grandmother. And I was like, what? And they said, yeah, you can go. I said, well, I'm gone already. So you're gonna have to figure that out. And I couldn't figure it out at my department level. So I went to the graduate level, and I went to First Nations House, who understood what it meant to be connected to a grandparent. And they advocated for me. And so I ended up there. And with my grandmother, and you know, she healed me. And she told me stories over and over, you know, and she settled me with her calmness when I was like rushing. And she'd say, "Dawnis, Oma Bejan, Namat Oma." And I would sit. And then I just sit because she had this calm. And I had to settle before she'd even speak. She wouldn't speak when I was rushing. And then she would say to me, she'd say, "Okay, now you can pick up your work." And I would get up and I would pick up my work, and I would be a different energy. And you know, there's things about my grandmother, I don't know if you'll believe them, but birds talked to her. And she understood them. It might have only happened once, but it happened. And my cuckoo, she would know when somebody was coming. She'd know just how much food to make. And nobody had to tell her. She had this thing called intuition. And I learned to nurture my intuition. When I see something and I'm like, oh, I should pick that up. And then I tell myself, oh, I don't need that. That we don't use that for this season. We use that for next season. I have all these logical reasons why I don't need that. But if I don't listen, I'm going to go somewhere and I'm going to need that. I'm going to find out why I had that intuition. But she had that intuition. She had that inner line and that inner tie. And I truly believe it's because the time I spent with her that I was able to make the kind of decisions that allowed me to actually pick up my law. I traveled very far to find out, because I had to put off school, I had to put off my studies, I even had to put off my apprenticeship with one of my teachers who was waiting for me. And because I needed to care for her. Then at her funeral, a pipe came to sit with me, and I was raised to sit with this pipe. And then I had to grieve my grandmother, and then I had to make a home for my pipe. And I had to go out fasting to seek that work for 4 days on the land. And I had to do so many different things. And I ended up being called home after I lapsed from university. Thought I wasn't practicing the law because I had a grandnephew born that was apprehended at birth. And we ended up in a court case. I ended up in a court case seeking guardianship, legal guardianship of my great nephew. And I remember being there, and one of the lawyers, I had like there was all these different people, my own family, and also 2 child and family service agencies in that courtroom. And I was the oldest woman in my family line. And I said, that's my responsibility. I don't want decisions made about my great nephew with the lowest bar. In our language, one of the words for aunt is little mother. And we don't have great aunt and great uncles. We have many, many grandmothers and many, many grandfathers. We have grandparents. They're all grandparents. And I ended up there, and they said, she's a distant aunt. And I said, why am I a distant aunt? They said, because you live out of province. And I said, I've been home to my niece every time she's like, I come home and pick her up. Any opportunity I have, I take her for weeks in the summer. I take her to ceremonies. When she had her first moon time, I was there. I was there to speak with her. You know, I'm not distant, you know. And so for me, this ended up this weird convoluted way. I said, I moved out of my career and I said, I'm gonna just come home. And I didn't have a chance people didn't think there was a precedent. People didn't think there was a chance. And I said, I still have to stand for him, even if it puts me $40,000 in debt. I have to, even if I stand away from my career, I have to stand for him. That was never a choice in me. And what I found out, I became his great, his guardian. And then eventually he adopted me and my husband in ceremony, traditional ceremony, which doesn't displace or cut a connection. It only adds and builds to a connection. And I ended up at the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Inquiry testifying to our law. And I told them about my story of wanting to learn that law and about that tobacco that I offered and what I had learned along the way. And afterwards, a Dakota grandmother came up to me. She said, I want to talk to you. And I was ready to get in trouble because I'm 2nd degree Madawan. That just means like you're starting to work for the people. 3rd degree Madawan is when you become doing that work of a teacher. 4th degree Madawan is when you carry that lodge, and there goes all the way up to 8th degree Madawan. I'm like just only 2. So I didn't think I had reason to speak about our law there. But they wanted me there because of my Western law degrees to speak about our traditional law. And I told them, ask our grandparents. They're the ones that I look to learn our law. But they wouldn't qualify as legal experts. And then I asked my grandparents, I said, what do I do? They want to talk to me, but I learned from you. And they said, you know what? Maybe they're not ready. You go and you speak for us because you're the one that has standing there. And I gave them tobacco and I asked them to sit with me. And I said, you witness for me, please. If I overstep, if I forget something, if I need to be corrected, I don't care about the rules of court. I'm asking you. Listen for me and do that work. And they did. And I spoke in front of them. I spoke in front of family members, my own family members who are missing their mother. I spoke in front of lodge carriers, fluent language speakers who I look up to and think are way more learned than I. So I was ready to get in trouble. When this Dakota grandmother came up and, I got celebrated by my own community, and then I went over there prepared. And she said to me, this is Catherine Whitecloud. She told me, she said, I don't know how it is about among the Ojibways. She's Dakota. She said, I don't know how it is about among the Ojibways, but among our people, we still remember. It's our grandmothers that carry the law. And she said, the choices you made in your life brought you to the law. That's why you left. That's why you came home and you took up your responsibilities. She said, that tobacco brought you to where you wanted to be. You're carrying that law. That's what tied you to your decision making. So, miigwech, nikanigana.
Miigwech, Dawnis. That was wonderful. Thank you. So in terms of proceedings, I will take the next few minutes to ask a few questions that came up. In the meanwhile, as the audience, if there's any questions that come to your mind, you're welcome to type them into the chat. And there was dedicated time for the audience members to also ask questions of our panelists. So there's, while listening to both the speakers, I found that there was a common theme. For instance, Dr. Mattson spoke about being understood, the laws around adoption being misunderstood by Canadian law. Dawnis, you spoke about how the library resources didn't really represent your traditional teachings. We know that, for example, talking about adoption, the Inuit have been able to achieve some recognition of traditional adoption practices. My question to you now is, how do you propose, to both of you, that we address the distortion of Indigenous or Islamic law when being interpreted by Canadian legal institutions, as that was something that both of you raised?
I defer to you.
Okay, my sister Dawnis, I could listen to all day, but I will. I have an obligation, so I'll speak on this panel too. One of the things I want to say is that first of all, the idea that so-called that Sharia is law, is Islamic law, is part of the problem, right? Law has a very narrow meaning. But for us, the Sharia includes, it can't be separated from all of the different norms, right? All of the different norms that we have to follow. So it includes things that traditionally weren't part of the government's responsibility, or might not even go to court, but these are still the things that we have to live our life by as Muslims. And the pre-modern, pre-colonized in Muslim societies, before colonization, before modernity, the involvement of the state in people's lives was very, very limited. I mean, people didn't seek the state or the courts in the first order. That was like the last ditch effort. That was at the end. If everything else failed, then you would go there. And even when you got to court, the judge was supposed to, the qadi was supposed to kind of drag it out, like actually let people, even, if you can still find it in some places that are maybe a little bit less urban, is that the judge would sit there while you have family members arguing with each other. The kind of decorum that you find in a Canadian court wouldn't be there. The whole point is understanding that some people, they just haven't had the chance to be heard. or they felt that they weren't heard. And so at least the judge is there to say, no, now here in this room, everyone gets a chance to speak, and you can't tell them to be quiet. And so you would find people telling their story, especially if they're like someone in the family or in the community who might be a little marginalized, or for some, you know, some reason like that. And then once they all spoke their heart, then also the judge would try to nudge them in ways to let them try to figure it out themselves, because the last thing you want to do is, you know, when you force a decision, what you inevitably get is resentment. Like, you may get their compliance at that moment, but it usually doesn't help heal the problem in the community or the family, and in fact it might even make it worse. So this is one thing to understand. And unfortunately, like, and what's beautiful is that when you have a community, most things are, you have a lot of people in your life, and you have a lot of people giving you advice and telling you to do the right thing. They're not telling you do the legal thing. They're saying do the right thing, right? And they're helping you do the right thing, and they expect it from you, and they show their disappointment in you if you don't do the right thing, and they encourage you if you do, or, you know, they encourage you if you do the right thing, or the generous thing, or the kind thing. So the problem here is that when we get to Canadian law, a Canadian system, it's the idea that law is a specialty, okay? That what we're seeking is the specialized discipline for legal specialists. And what that also means is that then there's a very small group of our community who are chosen to be experts who can speak on this topic. And Professor Naveen Ruda knows how this turned out, I don't know, a decade or so ago, when there was a proposal for some alternative dispute resolution in Muslim families in Ontario. I mean, there was a lot of Islamophobia and stuff that happened, people freaking out about this, but also even within the Muslim community, Muslims rightly said, and a lot of women, and Professor Rida was one of them, she's written about this. I was actually living in the States at that time, but the problem was the people who were considered or being uplifted as the experts were just this small subset of kind of technical experts, when the reality is that the sacred path that we're living is much more complicated than that, and actually relies primarily on the support of the community to uphold the norms, not a legal expert. And so I think that's the problem, and that's why so many Muslims in Canada are trying to figure out ways to create community and bring people together, so that, like, to focus first on the relationships, and to be in relationships where we're supporting each other. Because when you start at this kind of very narrow idea of law, it inevitably ends up heavy-handed and not really very just, either from the power dynamics within the community or from outside, where the people, as I mean, Dawnis, when you said I felt sick, I remember having that feeling of looking at some, books about Islamic law written by, people from outside the tradition. And I had that same, I know exactly what you mean, that same feeling of feeling like a very icky feeling, really not feeling recognized, and feeling kind of observed and mischaracterized very much.
I find too, I really like what you said about the narrowness of law. I know one of the professors, Professor Hogg at U of T, he said, what you're gonna do, when he saw me the beginning of my writing of my SJD, he was like, you're gonna put the E in the heart of law. But that's how it's described in my community, is like coming to one heart, one mind. There isn't just like, it seems like it's very mind focused, Canadian law, and very rule based. And the order in our world comes from the heartbeat, comes from that other side. And creation and life comes from woman. And it seems like that's taken out a lot in the law. And for us, because we practice our law in our heart and our mind, there isn't anybody who can practice law on my behalf. It's not an expert, like it's not an expert area. The reason that our grandparents are so revered is because of their wisdom and what they've been able to pick up in their lifetime. But everybody is around a circle. So it's not only the legal system that is narrow, it's also the governance system is very hierarchical, very control-oriented, and it's very impacted by colonization. And so that real colonial force structure is not a good living structure. It's a good extraction structure. It's not a way of life. It's not functional. So in my mind, like I have used Canadian law in that instance. So I try to advocate within that, but for me, I put my faith, I put my time, I put my energy, I put my belief into a larger understanding of Minawaanigogiizhigok, which is I found out the word for our law is Anishinaabe Minawaanigogiizhigok or Anishinaabe Minawaanigogiizhigok. And what my uncle told me is he said, you know what, that word for our law is the same word we use for pipe ceremony. So as we're pointing like that Minawaanigogiizhigok, that pipe. And when we're doing pipe prayer, we're acknowledging all the beings that have work in life. So we're acknowledging the sunrise, or acknowledging, the noontime. We're acknowledging all the parts of the day. We're acknowledging all of the spirits. We're acknowledging all of the seasons. We're acknowledging all of the gifts of creation and all the beings that do the work of life. And so that's Minawaanigogiizhigok. That's our law. And it's practiced in an entirely different way than a colonial structure.
Thank you for both those replies. I do have a few other questions, but I would like the community to have an opportunity to ask you questions. So I'm reading from the chat. This question is for Dawnis. Can you please speak more about how your relationships with your family and community influence your understanding of law? How is Indigenous identity tied to the law?
I think, well, for one is that our law is, we can't practice on behalf of another. So everybody's an Indigenous lawyer. Everyone is an Indigenous lawyer. And we see that the same way, not only within our community, but also external to our community. That's how we make relations. That's how we make treaty. So everybody's practicing, walking around, living their life, practicing their own law. And I'll use the words of my late teacher, one of them, Lee Miracle, when she talks about everybody in the territory is stolo. She said they could be bad at it, but they're still stolo. And it's our responsibility as the people we're responsible for them. We're responsible for teaching them about the law, about the governance, about the relationship to the land. And I think that's another thing about our identity and also our law is that it's not human-centered. Our worldview is not human-centered and our law is not human-centered. I don't believe human beings make law. I've studied our law and I don't believe we make it in our system. We have like what was mentioned before, the one bowl, one spoon, or the dish with one spoon treaties. And I studied the treaties that we've made between nations, international treaties between Indigenous nations. And I've studied treaties with settlers, and I've studied like a lot of the oratory around treaties. And it sounds a lot like what I've been taught about our creation story, our worldview, and things we're obligated to do anyways, just because that's how life flows, you know? And so what I find in the law, the way I see it, and this is just my thought, this is just my response to studying it. What I see happening when we say have treaties is we find the law we lost. What we forgot, because our creation story tells us that there's a harmony that exists in the world, that creative force of love, that kindness that emanates, that's the creative force of creation, and that balance is everywhere. And as humans, if we take ourselves out of that, we've forgotten something from creation. And so when we make law or make treaty, we're raising that. We're raising that up between ourselves. That's the way I see it. We're raising up what we had forgot, what we need to be able to make our relationships right again and in harmony with one another as the world was meant to be. Ingrid.
Thank you, Dawnis. I see that there is Omar Riyad. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Sorry, just unmuting. Miigwech as well. Thank you both for speaking. I had a brief question that is more long-winded than I could probably say. What I wanted to think about is that with the situation of truth and reconciliation, my understanding is, given the situation abroad and overseas, there's protests happening here. I don't really know if I could take a position or side because I really lack the understanding of the 60 million plus people that and their ancestors that are in the soil under my feet. So how can we lead this legal challenge of truth and reconciliation so that Canada can be the future example of what a nation to nation situation can be?
Was that question for either both panelists or one of the panelists?
It was for either panelist, if whichever would like to step in, to be honest.
Dawnis, I'm going to let you speak to this because I believe it really is. Yeah, go ahead.
I guess what I would say is we don't have to be right to be good. We're humans, and the stories that are told in our oratory and our history show that as humans, we're like the toddlers of creation. You ever see a toddler walk? We're the babies. Every other being came before us. All the other nations came before us. The animals, the plants, the trees, the stars, the mountains, the waters. Those are our elder brothers, elder sisters. We have grandparents in creation. We have parents, like they're the ones we look to. As human beings, we get it wrong a lot. Our great stories, like this old stories, the forever stories, are about our trickster figure, you know, and our trickster figure can be great and can be greedy, can be heroic, and can be really harmful. You know, in our old stories, there's always both. There's violence, and then there's those ones who stand up. And sometimes they just stand up and they're just offering their tobacco at sunrise, you know, and doing their best in their day. And it's the difference between one person still remembering creation, still remembering our instructions, still remembering and making the choices in their life to live in a good way, as good as they're able to, that have been the difference between, life and utter destruction in our creation stories and in our old stories. So I would say, whether we're able to do something, whether we're 100% right, whether we make what our history is. I just now heard a winter story out of the class coming before here, and I don't know if anybody here has a story of a great flood, but in our winter stories, we have a story of a great flood, and it was our trickster figure who started it. So we've destroyed the world, or been close to destroying the world ourselves, all on our own, even before colonization. So I think as human beings, we're always going to start from that duality. And whatever we're able to do to learn our law, to live our law, and to bring that forward, I think that would be to find our way to our heart and our mind through our law that we were given to stand in relation with each other. That's what I see as my responsibility.
Fatima, if I can I had an experience many years ago that I think about so often. I was in university. This was in 1987. I'm 60 years old, so I was young. It was many, many years ago. And I needed money to pay off my student loan, my university loan. So a very good paying job was tree planting. So I did that, of course, for the logging companies. So I went to Northern Ontario, and that was very good. A lot of insects, but which weren't so good, but but the money was good. It was easy to plant. Then I went with some friends and we went out to British Columbia, and it was completely different. And it was very shocking to me because that was the first time I'd seen clear-cut mountains. And I just remember wandering up and down the mountain with my shovel, and all you could hear was like click, because the shovel hitting the stone. Because when the trees were clear cut, the first rain, everything came down. All of the other all the bushes were taken away, everything. So then all the soil was washed. I couldn't even find 3 inches for the plug of a seedling. And I've thought about that like 40 years later. I think about it because I think about, to me, I look back at it sort of what colonialism has done and this modern capitalist system, which is that once you've just cut everything down, you've taken you can't just plant a tree, it isn't just, you can't just go replant trees and think you're going to have the same thing. How do you even get that soil on back, enough soil? First you have to have first you have to have the animals and the birds like crap on the mountain, right? So it's gonna be like, so that's kind of like, we're sort of there. We're just building up a little base, and then tiny little things can start to grow, like little plants, and then they die, they grow and they die, and then some more, maybe grasses, and then some other, little animals will bring things in. It's going to take a long time to build that soil back up, and then to have bigger and bigger, to the point where, when will it be that you could have a forest again and big trees? It's going to be many generations. So I feel like we're all kind of living in the consequence of clear cutting our communities, our traditions, our law, our way of life, like everything dismantled. And now we're just like stumbling around trying to do little things and have the tiniest, little layer, but we know that it's going to be a mess. And part of what we're doing is we're leaving that and hopefully be compost for the next one to do a little more. So we hope that at least we're making some contribution, but be realistic that it's not like we're just magically rebuilding the whole thing. It takes time. And so I think it does need from all of us a lot of generosity and a lot of forgiveness. And like, let people try things, and it doesn't work out. If they try with good intention, it doesn't work out, then it's okay. Maybe it's built up something for the next generation.
Thank you. I really I think both of you touched on the idea of ethical practice being iterative, something that you build upon slowly. It's not something, as in any sport, you don't get to the Olympics right away. You slowly build your ethical muscle as well, and your ability to be, as you all mentioned, to do the right thing, to do the kind thing, to live the good life. Just because we don't have any other questions, I do have a question that I really wanted your opinions on. As a very new student of common law, and somebody who was raised in sort of the Islamic tradition, I often wonder, how do you reconcile the idea of what we call Islamic law or Indigenous law, that the rights and responsibilities in those legal systems come from the Creator or from God or from Allah? How do you reconcile that with the Canadian legal framework that we exist in?
I'll let you go first.
I'll only go first so that you can go last then. Or you can finish us up, God willing. So the first thing I'll say is that one of the things I really appreciate about the Islamic worldview is that it's actually very optimistic about people. So we believe that all human beings are born spiritually sound, not broken, not with sin, not, we are born with what's called fitra, which is spiritual soundness. We are actually created by God. We're created by the Creator to be good, to feel happy when we do good, to we've already been in pre-existence in the presence of the divine. So we have that knowledge. It's not something we have to learn. We know that. And when we feel bad, it's because we're going away from that. So we have this internal compass. Now, of course, in the world, there are a lot of problems, but we also believe, the Quran says that God sent to every people a guide, and that for most people, we don't know who those were. We don't know the names. There are a few names that are given to us, but we don't know most of the names. So when Muslims go to, meet people from other cultures or go to new places, our expectation is actually that most people will be good. Most people will know basic right and wrong. Most people will want to seek that, and will have some kind of tradition that at least they have some basic good traditions that help guide them. It doesn't mean all of them will be good, but we expect to find a lot. First of all, as human beings, we know that we have the same Creator, we have the same spiritual soundness, and that we all have the potential to get back to that when we go astray, and that we should find these good things. So it's not like there's this view like, oh, there's only this revelation, this tradition is given by God, and everything else is not. That's not the sound theological view. So that optimistic view is good, but then there's also actually in Islamic law itself, one of the main sources of law is what's called good custom, urf or adat in Arabic. And one of the, major legal maxims is good custom is a source of law. So what that means is that it actually means that you can't even have so-called law unless you do have good customs. So we need to know what those are. And it means things like, okay, I'll just give you a quick example. Something like there is an obligation, there's an Islamic teaching, and it's actually embedded in the law that your neighbor has a right to life-giving sustenance if they don't have enough. Like if your neighbor is starving, they actually have a right for food from you, to ask for food. Now, of course, to take that to court or ask, if it gets to that point, you've really failed, because you should actually know your neighbor. But how do you know your neighbor? How do you establish a relationship? How do you know them enough so that you know what they need? That really is in the realm of custom. Like, it depends on how our neighborhoods are, how our housing is, what are the customs of the neighborhood where people get to know each other, right? So all of those things, we should be like, from a Muslim perspective, if we actually want to practice the sacred law, we need to really deeply understand what are the good customs and practices and existing things, so that manifest those values. And there's absolutely no problem with us uplifting them. In fact, we have to uplift them, right? So, I shouldn't just be, oh, like, that's not my custom. No, it's a good custom. No, we should uphold it, because that's in fact part of the sacred law.
Miigwech. I think there's definitely a conflict, because our traditions always have spirit. Everything begins with spirit. And there's a humbleness that comes with that. There's a decenteredness that comes with that, that I think is critical to ethics, that I don't find in common law and I don't find in Western law. So I think there's a definite conflict. I still don't acknowledge Canadian law or colonial law as like an end state or an advance, which is why I spend the majority of my time studying and practicing Anishinaabe law outside of Western law. And I think that the more people are able to understand that, that we have, I think people focus on where is my place in Western law, right? So where do Indigenous people or Indigenous laws sit within Western law? And they ask themselves that, or in international law, which is the majority, like in what we understand to be international law, the United Nations, and like the Westphalian state model is still the minority of the world. It's very non-representative. And I think for me, I look at the whole of the world, the whole of the legal traditions, those that are not represented within those systems. And I think that there's the majority exist outside of that system. And I think people don't ask themselves often. Like, I think they think if I don't have a place in Western law, I don't have a place at all. If my law isn't recognized by colonial law, there's no place at all for who I am. And I would challenge anybody to study a bit and ask themselves, where is my role in Anishinaabe law? Because I'll tell you, there is place, there is belonging, there is relationship within Anishinaabe law to all of creation, including other nations of humankind. And we have stories, we have prophecies that speak of this time when all peoples from the earth come to our land. And whether they came for gold or whether they came because they were fleeing persecution, or whether they came for a better life and a more westernized life, or for whatever reason they came, I do believe it's spirit. It's spirit that's moving the people to our lands. And I think it's because there's something that Indigenous people what we remember about our relationship with the earth, our relationship with the animals, um, our laws. Some of our laws are they're good laws. And I think it's hard talking about them in the abstract because it's like you don't pick berries, all the berries off one plant. If you're a good berry picker, you pick the big ripe berries, just a bit, and you leave the rest for everybody else who needs them. That means you think about all your relatives, you think about your neighbors as you harvest. You move on to the next bush and pick a little, and you wait till they get ready and big. You don't take them all when they're just still growing. You know, you think about all your neighbors, you think about your relatives, you think about the animals, you think about the birds even. And who else do you think about? I remember thinking, I'll leave those. I remember thinking, I'm glad I left those berries on the bush because I could see those little tiny birds around this time when the snow is crusty. And then those little tiny birds that stick around, they can't get to the ground. They survive off those dried little berries on the branch. That could be the difference between life and death. And we even think about beyond animals and insects for the ones that fall on the ground. But we think about the bush itself. The bush has a right to have children and to see them grow up. So we leave some for that. So I think that's before you harvest, you think about everyone, all your relations. That's how we end our speeches when we say Nikanigana. That means we're thinking about all our relatives. Those are the kind of laws that I'm talking about. That if we know and if we practice, it changes the way we make decisions. And I would say we don't have to be perfect. We don't have to be right. We don't have to be without wrong to be able to say, life is sacred. Life is sacred. And no one has a right to take life. Every people has a purpose, has a belonging, has a meaning, and has a gift for the world. And it's not for any of us to take that from them. And I think every single one of us can stand for that. Life is good. Nikanigana.
Thank you. I am paying attention to the time. We just have one question in the chat. And if it's okay, I will pose that question so that it's because it was typed in, and then we will, that will be the last question that we ask during today's panel, if that's okay. So the question is, who decides if it is a good law? And they didn't specify who they were asking. So I suppose it's sent to both of you.
I'll just go because I saw the question come in just when I was talking or after I was talking. So maybe it relates to when I said that the part of the sacred path is to recognize if there is a good custom, right? A good custom to uphold that. So good in what sense? Good here is defined as one, of course, not violating a very clear so, there are some red lines about things that you can do or can't do, but the vast majority of the sacred path has nothing to do with the state, right? It is what you are. No one else is going to get involved in it, really. I mean, very rarely. It's a small. If you go in a pyramid, it's sort of like that. That's just the every once in a while you'll come in. And you really do want to minimize it because the goal is to have harmony and peace in society and among people, not in society, but among people, to have relationships, good, positive relationships. So good in that sense, when we look around and see what is a good custom, whether it is you know, something that my neighbors are doing, or whether it is part of, I don't know, some bylaw maybe the city puts in, or if I'm, you know, spending some time with a First Nations community, whatever it is, the definition of good in this sense is that it is not harmful, right? So it's not being harmful, and that it promotes benefits. So what does that mean? Not harmful. It's not, you know, interfering with someone else's ability to live and flourish. And that does include not just human beings, but others. You know, like one of the, like I'll tell you a conflict that I have all the time, and I feel it now. I'm so happy for the snow now, because I know for many reasons, the cold is purifying, it's good, it's healthy, but also it means that the golf course down the street won't open for a little while longer, because it's so nice in winter. But as soon as it opens, they're going to go and spray all sorts of chemicals on. And every year, like it's so painful to me, because I know they're killing everything that lives there, the birds that are flying around there all winter, the animals that live on it, and then it runs down into the river. And I can't understand how that can happen, but that's the idea of, well, if you have private property, you can do with it what you want. So to me, that's clearly that's a bad law. That's obviously a bad law, and anything that promotes it would be bad. So but how then do we go about it? For us as Muslims, we're not living in we're very scattered throughout this country, although we have neighborhoods or communities where there are more of us. It is it has as much to do with finding others who also are seeking the good, no matter if they're from our religious tradition or other traditions. Like, it really is about seeking those opportunities to benefit, to provide benefit, and to facilitate benefit, and to remove barriers. I mean, I think that's the basic definition, and there's an Arabic phrase for it, but that's really what it is about trying to remove harms and barriers for others, and to facilitate or open up, you know, so they can just go ahead and keep going on their path and seeking what makes them flourish. So may God help us with that.
Thank you. That question was for you, Dr. Ingrid Mattson. So thank you for fielding that. Dr. Naveen, I see there's one raised hand, but I'm also conscious of the time. Do you think we have the time to take that question, or should we proceed towards closing? What would you recommend?
Yes, I think we have the time, Fatima. Thank you.
Okay. So Nabila, please do go ahead and ask your question.
Actually, not a question, a clarification. It was my question, and I privately messaged it to Sister Ingrid for a reason, because I provided a specific example. So if you could kindly give me your email address, or I posted mine, if you could get back to me through email, like that would be great. Like, I didn't post it to everyone, because that would detract from the main topic of today's conversation. That's why I posted that message that privately to you. I don't know if you go ahead.
No, I don't usually keep that open when we're on these, but I can find it.
It was a very specific example, very specific. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Nabila. So at this point, I don't see any other questions in the chat. I don't see any other raised hands. So I would like to introduce Dr. Naveen Reda, who is the Associate Professor of Muslim Studies at Emmanuel College of Victoria University in the University of Toronto. Dr. Naveen Reda will offer closing remarks.
Thank you so much to our wonderful speakers, Dr. Ingrid Mattson and Minawaanigogiizhigok, or Dawnis Kennedy. I learned a great deal from you, especially about the importance of relationships to others, relationships to extended family, to community, and also to the land and to other beings on the land when it comes to Indigenous law and when it comes to Islamic law. So there's a lot we can learn from each other. I greatly appreciate you being here and sharing your knowledge of these laws with us. I also want to thank Fatima Ahmed for this excellent job of moderating this panel and for your insightful questions. I'd also like to thank Olive Tree Foundation for their generous support of this program, and Muhammad Hasib Ali for telling us something about Olive Tree Foundation. And also, I'd like to thank our principal, Hiran Kimkrak, for her leadership of Emmanuel College and for being here with us today, and also Dr. Henry Shu for his leadership of and his assistance with the Center for the Study of Religion and its Context. And finally, and last but not least, I'd like to thank Sean Houston for the wonderful job that he has done in supporting this panel technologically and also in organization, and so much help before and also after when he will be taking care of the recording. So thank you all, and we look forward to seeing you, inshallah, God willing, some other time.